Where do you think that picture is? Can you have a guess? Yes, sir. It looks like India, right? I'm Indian, right? This is actually New Jersey, right? And my relatives, all of my good relative uncles and aunts, all contributed to this. It's made completely by volunteers, and they've worked on it for like, I can't remember how many years. If you go in it, it is the most ornate. It's completely made out of granite, 2 different kinds of granite. Anyways, I bring it up because, where are we, right? I mean, if anything picks it up, this picture right here really illustrates. So again, if you just walked in, I'm going to give all the details about the class at the end, okay? I just want to get into it because we have a short time and I just want to make the most of our time, okay? I figure the details I can get to you in a lot of different ways, right? So, by the way, my name is Jatine. Okay, and I want to make sure for all of you, okay, again, it's going to take me a while to learn everyone's names, okay, but feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, whatever, or you can use the menti.com, put in the code, and you can interact with the class that way, okay? So, let's keep going here. Where are we? Gaudium et spes, okay? I don't know how to say Latin, so if any of you can say that better. This was the Catholic Church's official position from 1967. At all times, the Church carries the responsibility of reading the signs of the times. Did you catch that? Responsibility. It's your responsibility. Reading the times and interpreting them in the light of the gospel. We must begin with an informed effort. Did you catch that? Informed. Okay? An informed effort to ascertain the historical forces, convictions, and hopes that are in play. Okay? Informed, you know what that means is it's not just a bunch of opinions, okay? I know you have your opinion. I know I have mine, okay? We all have our opinion of what's happening. What I did is I spent the last 3 years, not the last, but I spent 3 years in getting my master's degree from Houston Baptist. And the thought here is I wanted more than my opinion, right? I wanted supported opinions. Things that you could call it the wavelength of just the wavelength of thought. That's actually academic thought. My classes were led by probably some of the biggest names you'll ever hear. One of my teachers was William Craig. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but yeah, one of my teachers was William Craig. I've got pictures next to him. Took his pic. Nancy Piercy, one of the big homeschool mom. A lot of homeschoolers go to Nancy Piercy, and she was one of my professors, and got to ask each of these professors firsthand. I want to get past the opinion. Tell me what you think. And remarkably, there's a lot to an informed effort, much more than our opinion. First thing I learned was a lot of humility, that my opinions were really pretty bad. And they had to get undone. And so this class is going to help you get started in forming an informed opinion, okay? Not going to try to lead you like you're going to be able to come up with your own conclusions, okay? But I do want to make sure you're aware. And this is actually a responsibility that as a Christian you share. 1 Peter reminds us, in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks, right? Not just people who are interested, right? It could be the mockers. It could be anybody. Everyone who asks for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness, and the key word here is respect. I went through part of this class with some other families just to test the material. One of the big things they brought up was that they had no idea even how to relate to the thoughts of most people around them. But the first step in respect is the ability to understand where someone's coming from, right? And so in this class, the goal will be to help you understand where people are coming from when you talk to them. You'd be surprised that as you know Jesus more and more, you'd be surprised how far you are from the thinking that most people actually live by day. Okay? So this will be part of, I just want to remind you of 1 Peter because that can help us. So first question we're going to answer, what is a culture, right? It's people, right? People that share a unity or agreement in suffering. Okay, in other words, a culture tends to think of themselves as suffering together and working together. By the way, I want to make sure you're clear. There's never just one culture. Okay, there is the popular culture. You can think of a bell curve. Okay, there's a popular culture, and then there's a lot of subcultures. Okay, alternative cultures. You your home group is a culture, right? Because it's a people that share, and one of the things is a unity or or agreement in suffering. They also share moralities or codes of conduct. Okay, universal. Sometimes we think that that as Christians we have maybe the corner on morality, but the truth is, if you look at a Hindu mom and the way that a Hindu mom raises her children, you'd be hard pressed to find any difference in the code of conduct and the morality of a Hindu mom and a Christian mom. It's interesting, but when you get into cultural apologetics, those things matter a lot as far as being able to have discussions and answers and make a difference. Okay, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on. Common language, okay, slang, gestures. This is really important. There's code words that only your culture really understands the nuance of. Okay, if you're in part of the Goth culture, for example, there's certain things, there's certain words that you use, and there's certain meanings associated with those words. Okay, somebody who's not part of that culture would listen to it and just not get it. Right? Same thing with language, obviously, but it goes more than language. It goes into the idioms and the gestures, and there's meaning. That keyword meaning, we're going to talk about a lot. Style. People that share a common style. I don't know if you knew this, but style is much more than what meets the eye. Okay, I'll give you an example. Tattoos. Okay, I don't know if you knew this, but tattoos are actually they're a style. Okay, but what they represent to a lot of people is an identity that doesn't change. For a lot of people whose worlds change all the time, getting a tattoo is something that's stable, something that stays in their life. Okay, so that's an example of all style actually has something, just like I shared with tattoos, all styles have a basis, something that's deeply encoded in what they're doing. The decorations on a wall, okay, even though for many of us, we'll just say, hey, it just looks good, or it looks pretty, or whatever. But all style actually carries deeply encoded meaning to the person that's actually forming that style. Okay, and so within cultures, you'll see different styles. And so same thing with like Goths. Goths dress a certain way. And, we don't tend to understand this, but when you start studying culture, you start understanding that the reason that they're dressing, there's actually a basis behind it. Okay, and we'll get into it a little bit later on, but I just want to bring this up. So that's what a culture is. They share these common aspects. There's others, but I just want to bring these up. And again, if you want to ask any questions or post any comments, just feel free at any time. Okay, I know it's hard because we just started, and so I wanted this first week to be kind of a primer, okay, an intro. Okay, let's keep going. There's two Christian views of culture. Okay. Just so you know that. There is the view of Tertullian. And his big question really gives you some insight. Okay? He had the question, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Okay? And his basic idea here was that culture is twisted and of demonic origin. Okay? And we must differentiate between the original purpose, in other words, this is the way culture should have looked, and the original purpose for which a thing was created, and the perverted use to which it may be put. Okay? So in other words, Tertullian's view of culture, and this is a Christian view, and I'm not trying to guide it. You could ask yourself, where are you on this view? Okay? But in Tertullian's view, there's the right way a culture should have been, and then there's the perversions of it. And so now this is a perverted view. And so the idea is that I want nothing to do with culture, or our culture that's out there. Right? I don't want anything to do with it. I've got my own little culture. So that's view one. What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? View two, this is a view held by Augustine. Culture, by examination, teaches the right attributes and the right actions of God so that we might know God. Okay? So Augustine's view of culture was that it's a teaching grounds. And we're all stuck in the middle of it. And by being stuck into culture, we get to know who God is. Okay? And so the idea here is that the earthly and the heavenly have very different ultimate destinies, yes. But for the present, they're mingled together from beginning to end until the final judgment. Okay. So in other words, Augustine was like, well, look, you know what? It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's all put together. No need to try to judge it up front. You just live it every day. He also had this idea that we are citizens of the earthly city to the extent that we love the earthly city as an end in itself. Okay. So in other words, if you love it, if you love the culture in and of itself and as an end, then you're a citizen of the earthly city. Okay. But we're citizens of the heavenly city to the extent that we make use of the earthly city, including its astonishing arts and cultural attainments, as a way of loving God. Okay, did you get that? So you can use culture and you can be a part of the world around you, and it could be because you're really, quote, worldly. You're into it. Okay? Or you can see it as, no, you're part of this temporary earthly city, and its arts and its cultural attainments are a way of loving God. Okay? Now, I'm not going to tell you where you need to be on this spectrum, okay? You know, what does Athens to do, Jerusalem, and then, you know, all the way over to, you know, culture actually has a way of leading us to God. And we're all somewhere in between there, okay? So you might want to think about, well, where am I? And you might even form your opinion through this class, okay? But that's the two opposing views. I wanted to get those up front, just so you know, we are going to be using view 2 here for the most part in this class. Okay. If you disagree, that's totally fine. I'd love to hear your reasoning behind it. Okay. Can you stand off the side so we can see the slides better? Thank you. All right. That's great. Yes, I can. Yes.
It's kind of like
I'm hiding it.
whenever you said back,
Yeah.
it creates a shadow that covers like.
Okay. Got it. I'm going to stand over here to the side. Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm out of the camera. Okay. Well, that's fine. I don't actually, as long as the slides are in there. So, okay. We'll get this working better next week. But now, here's something that's interesting. The ability to communicate with one another plays a significant role in what a culture and the church ultimately looks like. Okay? The church usually has to follow the trail of the culture, and the culture, believe it or not, follows the trail of communication. I want to bring this up. Like the early modes of communication, they created a homogeneous church culture. Okay? We're going to intermingle the popular culture, and I'm going to talk about church culture also, because they kind of relate to each other. And that's why you're in this class. And we are going to talk a lot about apologetics, okay? But this is a primer today, okay? And so the first thought here is that, see, before the printing press, you had this communication mainly occurred between large organizations, okay? You had to be big enough to actually write a book or publish a book. And you had to be able to take that book to other places. You had to own a book. Okay, that usually happened with large organizations. Okay, and so because of that, what happened was that basically extreme authority was prevalent. Okay, organizations were the public authority on interpreting life. Okay, so in other words, whoever controlled the communication controlled the message that everybody lived by. And if they controlled the message, they were the authority. You could believe your own thing, but you're way out of whack. Right? You're way out of line. So you had extreme authority, and that led to a homogeneous culture where everyone pretty much looked and acted according to the wishes and wisdom of the few in power. Okay? Now you could apply that to the church as well as to the culture at large. It was both true. There was a mirror of each other. Okay? So this was the early mode of communication. Then along came the printing press. Okay? And it radically impacted church culture. So with the printing press, communication occurs between large organizations and the masses, right? You had journalism, and you could go all the way back to Shakespeare, and he could write a book, and then that book could get published by a group like the church or some drama company, and the masses could be talked to. So the printing press led to balanced authority, which meant a rule of the masses, and churches were still public, and they balanced the authority of the government. Okay? What it meant because of the printing press is that the organizations were still the authority on interpreting life, and they still exerted a lot of influence on culture. But one of the things you saw was that people recognized that actions had consequences, okay? And morality and good judgment came through the printed materials that were available to the masses, okay? In other words, you picked up your Bible, you read it, and you came up with how to live a good moral life and how to make good judgments with your life. And you recognize that if you didn't, there were consequences to what you did. Okay? So this is the world of the Renaissance. Okay? This was the world of, and it led to Protestantism and Catholicism and actually further splintering in the church. Anyone with a printing press could start a movement, basically. Okay? Now, this was true all the way from the invention of the printing press all the way into and again, I want to bring this up that maybe even in the last 30 years. Okay? So this was the form of communication. We had a new form of communication come up, and it was really not even 30 years ago, and we called it social networking. And it's, again, radically transforming church culture. Okay? Now, if you're not aware of how communication impacts the culture, then you're going to miss out on, you could even ask the question, why is the world just going haywire, mayhem, right? And the real truth of the matter is because the form of communication has changed once again. It's as big of a leap in civilization and culture as the printing press was. In some ways, bigger, and the consequences, I want to show you past consequences to help you understand the consequences today. What we had is the communication now is anyone can talk to many people. So instead of just a single person being able to talk to masses or a single entity like the New York Times, okay? Now you can talk to as many people as you want. And even if it's not you directly, it's you said something which passed on, which passed on, which passed on, right? And so all of a sudden, you are able to communicate in a way. So the printing press you went from one to one, one to many. Now it's many to many. Okay? That's radical. What a big change. And look what it did. Okay? One, leadership. Well, church leadership no longer represents the authority of interpreting life. Right? Why? Because you can read and interact with the people that are near you or around you and form your own basis of authority of interpreting life. In other words, you're coming up with your own way of thinking about life and what it is. And so the church leadership has changed. It has led to what's called antinomianism. There's no real connection or consequences for our actions. Okay? In other words, when you're forming it yourself, your own opinion with your own friends, then when it doesn't work out, you figure out what to do about it on your own. It's not like there's this big standard objective like the Bible that, I mean, I'm not saying it's not guiding us today, okay? But in the culture that doesn't have a Bible, now you have antinomianism, no real connection to consequences, connection between consequences and actions. You also have anarchism. External laws and morals should be overthrown and people should use their own best judgments, okay? Why? Well, because you no longer need the New York Times. They now represent anybody. You could say it's the New York Times or a church or any organization now represents its own set of views, whereas you form your own with your own little culture. Okay? So it's a little bit of the Wild West that's happened because of social networking. Privatization. Now churches are no longer necessary to be the ones that are disseminating information. So churches are increasingly part of the private sphere of life. It's no longer public. So in other words, a church is no longer welcome in the public conversation. It's an opinion, just like all the other opinions that are out there. So church has become more and more privatized, and that has led to words and actions have begun to lose their meaning because people are trying to come up with things on their own. Church views are seen as increasingly out of touch or immoral, and rise of those with no religious affiliation. You've probably heard of the word nuns. Have you heard of that? N-O-N-E, the rise of the nuns. Okay, you got a question? Okay, yeah, the rise of the nuns, and the idea here, believe it or not, is there's an increasing percentage of our culture, more and more percentage, that doesn't have a religious affiliation. That doesn't mean that they're saying they're not Christian. It doesn't even mean that they're saying that they're not religious. Okay, what they're saying is, I have my doubts about being involved in a monolithic organization that we call the church. Now, this is all the direct result of social networking. The mode of communication has changed. It's left church leaders just wondering, what do we do? What's even happening around us? We don't understand the culture. That's the way you'd put it, okay? But so what's happened is that people do come. Now, by the way, you may have thought this, okay, because I did. We often think that maybe people are no longer attending church because they're not interested in the morality of the church. Okay, you probably heard that. Maybe you've even thought it. Like somehow they're trying to run from Jesus. Okay, but you know the problem with that idea? Every study that's been done with the with churches and just where they're at and how attendance goes shows that the liberal denominations are losing people faster than the conservative ones. Okay? In other words, if it was really about morality, you would think that people would be flocking to the liberal churches, the ones that are saying just do whatever you want. Okay? But that's not true. Okay? People are just saying, you know what? We just don't want anything to do with church at all. Okay? See, it's a very different thing. And this is an example of you can have your own opinion, but when you look at an informed opinion, you find out that people aren't leaving church because of morality. As a matter of fact, people want churches to have morality. They want some kind of structure. They're leaving because they're not finding any meaning in it. Okay, and we're going to talk about this in this class. This is a primer. But basically, over time, when you don't have some base from which to form meaning, you can attend and over again, things start losing their meaning. And this is not something new. This is something that's been happening for 2,000 years. Okay? So when someone comes and they don't know, and we don't know how to bring meaning into their lives, they're just left with a bunch of questions that even if we answer them, it doesn't necessarily meet the need. Okay? So cultural apologetics, we're going to use the word meaning a lot because what we're saying is, you don't need to be really smart and have a lot of good answers, okay? What you need to know is where is this person coming from and how can I bring meaning into their lives, okay? And when you realize this, you also realize that people aren't actually trying to run from church, right? They just don't know how to put it together. They don't even know where, I mentioned where are we? If you were to ask most people, they have no idea where we are, right? Why? Because they're just doing what they do. Right? Everyone, all of us, we just do what we're doing. We got our social networking. Okay? Now what that leads to, it has led to, you could say, is disillusionment. Rapid societal change leads to a loss of faith in God and a loss of faith in the substitutes for God. Okay? Traditionally, if you didn't believe in God, you would go run to progress, or you just materialism, like just grab a lot of stuff, or technology. You would just believe in a future that was there for you. But what's happened in our culture today is you find disillusionment. Loss of faith in God, but a loss of faith in all the substitutes too. So what does that cause? Okay, so when you see this, the typical response to cultural disillusionment, one is anger, defiance and anger. Okay, it could be a hatred of God if they're religious, but it's a pent up anger. Okay, and this is where you start seeing movements like Black Lives Matter, where you start seeing just anger, it just looking for a fire to be stoked. Okay, but that's what it's coming from, is a cultural disillusionment. Where am I? How do I fit into this? And how do I make sense of everything? Another response to cultural disillusionment is fear. Right? God is, if you're religious, you'd be thinking God is against me. If you're not religious, it's a fear like I don't know how to move forward. I don't know what to do. And that leads to just, I'm just going to escape from it all. Ignore it all. Retreat to an imaginary world, video games, movies, and books and TV. Now this, sometimes you hear the question asked, where have all the men gone? Okay. And the point that people are trying to make is, where are the people who want to stand up for something? Right? And the answer is, most of us are too afraid to stand up for anything. And it's so much easier just to retreat to an imaginary world. We can't make sense of it all anyways. Okay? So without a good cultural education, which we don't get anymore, or an understanding of where we're at today, that's all we have is defiance, fear, escape, or paralysis. No hope to rely on to fuel the future, right? I don't know what I'm going to do. It's just day by day. Let's just try to figure this out. Okay, so this is the world of where we are. And I want to paint this picture. Where are we? This is the world that we live in. Okay, so I want to bring that up because there is a Christian response to our culture. You are the salt and light. Okay? And there's actually an awful lot. Oh, okay. Can you elaborate on the connection between the rise of the many-to-many communication and antinomianism and anarchism? Thank you. Okay. I'm glad somebody asked that. I will go back to that. But so basically the thought here is that as you have many-to-many communication, where you can talk to anybody, and what you're basically starting to do at that point, let me go ahead and go back in the slides here. Let's just go back for a minute. Okay. I'm sorry, I should have been looking up more, but we just started this, so. Yeah, so right here, yeah. So the question is, okay, so that no real connection between consequences and action. So what happens with social networking for a lot, just with the idea of social networking, is you're no longer looking to a monolithic organization like a church. Okay, and I'm not saying that about you. Okay, but again, you have to think about your culture that you live in. Okay, and in the culture that you live in, people are no longer looking to a monolithic organization that will provide them with a set of like, if you do this, this is the consequences that will occur. If you live with your boyfriend, then you're going to hurt your marriage. Okay? See, that would be an example of maybe a statement that would come from a monolithic organization. Okay? But when it's many to many, you're just asking your friends. And all the friends are all, we're all living together, and everyone starts living together. And so, and if things don't work out, then there's no one that's connecting and saying the reason things didn't work out is because you were living together. Okay? See that? So there's no longer any connection between the consequences and the actions, because there's no voice to say, hey, this was because this occurred. Okay? So that's where antinomianism comes from. Now, anarchism, okay, the reason that comes is because people start relying on their own judgments. Okay, there's an Old Testament phrase, every man went to his own tent, right? And the idea there is that people when there's not a monolithic voice that people respect and are really looking to, then you start looking to your own judgments, but then you start getting really comfortable looking to your own judgments. So then you hear somebody telling you should do something, and it's like, who are you? I'm quite comfortable deciding things for myself. So anarchism is this idea that all these external organizations and morals, they need to be overthrown. Like, they need to be removed. They're not actually helping. I know how to do things. All you need to do is just leave me alone. I can figure it out. Okay? So does that make sense? Does that help with the question? Okay. If you have any other questions, just feel free to go ahead and post them, and I'll try to remember to look more. Okay? So let's keep going back to, so we have the responses to cultural disillusionment. Again, I'm just trying to give you a primer. There's a lot of really good answers, okay? And they're so good that I spent 3 years studying it, but I wish I could have done more. And this class builds, every class builds on each other. Okay, if you imagine a bunch of different lenses, okay, I'm going to give you 6 different lenses through which to understand how to best help and be involved in the culture around you. When you have all 6 together, you have the ability, I'll just say this, one is to be always encouraged, okay? No longer wondering, hey, I don't know what's going on, and I don't know how to help speak into it. So encouragement comes, okay? The other thing that's encouraging when you have 6 different views of how to see things is you'll start understanding that, hey, I know what I can do with who I am. Okay? And that's all it takes, right? God doesn't need us to be, eggheads who are like overstudied to answer all the questions people have. They're not even good enough anyways. Okay? But if they were good enough for today, most of you here probably wouldn't. I know I don't feel comfortable, trying to remember a bunch of information. Okay? So we are going to do that in the class, but the cultural response, okay, the Christian response to a culture. One is, I do want to make sure you understand, we are in a time that you would call new atheism, okay? And that's distinguished from old atheism. And I just want to make this distinction again, just as a primer to bring you up to speed. The 1900s, there was a certain brand of atheism. People went around saying they didn't believe in God. And the Christians would respond with debates and logic. Okay. Now, the thing that was interesting was that by the turn of the century, and you don't hear this, okay, but by the turn of the century, many of the prime many of the well-known atheists had actually converted to belief in God. They'd given it up. In other words, atheism by the end of the 1900s had died. Okay? And the reason was because the Christian arguments were actually so good that they had to, in a sense, throw in the towel. Okay? I'll give you an example. One of the early arguments in the 1900s, throughout the 1900s, was there can't be God because there's evil in the world. Okay? And then along came Alvin Plantinga. He's a university professor. And I'm going to try to stand to the side, sorry. Alvin Plantinga came along and he wrote a book, and you can read this. It's called God, Freedom, and Evil. And he proved that God and evil can coexist, and it takes nothing off of God. You know, and it was such a good proof that every atheist immediately had to agree to it. Right? So you'll never meet an atheist who talks about how God and evil can't coexist. They'll just say, it seems like God wouldn't make evil. You know, they change their argument. But that's an example. Every argument that was presented that was a logical argument was actually answered so well that the atheists gave up. Yes, sir?
So kind of the point that you're getting at with this old atheism versus new atheism is that the old atheists, a lot of them ended up converting to Christianity because their drive for the logical answer.
That's right.
And their honesty towards that drive. Like you can still hear atheists today say, oh, well, how can God and evil coexist?
Yeah.
But that's the new atheist who's not really driven by that.
That's right. And that's exactly right. And so what's happened was that at the turn of the century, a lot of the atheists converted. Some of the best well-known, Anthony Flew is an example. And but then so what happened was that the new atheists were atheists that said, you know what, we can't fight the Christians with logic. We're going to fight them with emotion. Okay? So new atheism is not based on logic. It's based on, you know, all the wars that have ever been fought and have not killed as many people as have been killed in the name of religion. Okay? That's an example. See, that's an emotional argument. Okay? So what's happened is that atheism today is called new atheism, distinguished from old atheism, because new atheists, anyone pretty much that you talk to today, they're not really interested in all the logical arguments. Okay? They want to have answers that are more cultural in nature and deeper. Okay? And that's why this class. Okay? Now here's the other cool thing. At the beginning of the 1900s, the Christians didn't know how to respond to all these logical arguments. Okay? By the next 100 years they did. Well, guess what? Your challenge for the 2000s, your challenge is by the end of this century to be able to put to bed all of the new atheists, right? See, you get to, okay? You get to. And I want to make sure you see that. Every generation has its own challenges. We're not talking about logical arguments for God because they're not relevant today. Okay? I'm not saying people don't have them. Okay? People do have those questions. Okay? But they're not the primary blocks in people's lives. Okay? It's no longer driven by the need for logical answers. Debate is no longer a main focus. That's also something good for you. You no longer have to be an egghead in order to be really, really good with your faith and making a big difference. Okay? Now again, remember, most people who reject your faith actually are very open to it. Okay? They just don't know what to make of it. And I tried to give you this background of social networking just to kind of set the stage just a little bit. We're going to get a lot more into it. Okay. And a search for meaning, which ultimately can only be met by Jesus. Okay. Now here's the cool thing. Every single person you ever meet, including yourself, you're on a search for meaning. Okay. You are trying, even when you go to church, if it isn't meaningful, you're not going to go. You're going to find a different church. Okay. You're trying to find meaning in your work, meaning in your relationships. Everything you do is driven by a search for meaning. But guess what? That's universal. It's not unique to being a Christian. Your search for meaning is a universal search. And that's the cool thing about it is that everything that you struggle with now becomes your ally. Okay? When you think that the people around you are looking for meaning and you can provide that meaning because of your walk with Jesus, then you have something to say that people are all ears to hear. Okay? So, and that's what we're going to get into a little more. Another Christian response to our culture is just to recognize that there are actually no atheists Okay? Everyone has an ultimate concern. And that's called your weightiest conviction or interest. Okay? In other words, everybody trusts in something. They don't have to call it God. Everybody trusts in something. And whether it's youth, fitness, money, freedom, some people say the big God for a lot of people today is freedom. Maybe it's yourself. Be true to yourself. Do what feels right. Right? You know, whatever it might be, there are no atheists in cultural apologetics. In logical apologetics, you can argue, is there a God or is there not a God? In cultural apologetics, you just think, man, look, I don't care what you say about whether you believe in God or not. You have something that you're ultimately concerned about. And let's just talk about that. Okay? And guess what? You can continue the conversation. There's no dead end there. Okay? Augustine had the thought, God is that thing in which we place above all other things. Okay? That's his thought on it. Faith is the act of being ultimately concerned. Okay? The only question is, what is your faith lodged in? Okay? So if you're concerned about something, you're putting your faith in something. And if you're putting your faith in something, you now have something to talk and discuss ad infinitum with anybody you meet. Your neighbor, it can be somebody, your classmates. And I think the cool thing about this is when you start realizing that in cultural apologetics there are no atheists, your faith becomes more and more relevant, okay? Because see, without this understanding, you start thinking, no one's interested. How do I even get started? If I even mention the name of Jesus, people just shut it all down, right? And so you can't even get started. And that's part of the disillusionment and fear of what do I do now? And we're going to talk about this anyways, let me just keep going here. Okay. You are the salt and the light. Okay. You are privileged to lead the culture into meaningful, satisfying, truthful, and beautiful conclusions. Okay. Truth, beauty, and goodness. Those are three aspects. I'll mention those over and over again. Three aspects to your faith. There are also three key words that every person wants in their lives. Truth, beauty, and goodness. You're privileged to be able to lead your culture into truth, beauty, and goodness in cultural apologetics. Okay, that's what the focus is going to be. Now, you could ask the question: what does it take in order to be able to bring truth, beauty, and goodness to people, and maybe even for your own life? Okay, because I'm hoping that this training will give you some idea of maybe you have an itch that you didn't even know. Right, or that you need to scratch. Okay, so here's some of the class topics we're going to talk about. Okay, one is living as an alternative culture. Okay, that's what you are, right? You're Christians. We're Christians, right? We have our own little communities and we do our thing with our communities, and that alternative culture is a factory of meaning. It generates meaning for people around us. And so, but making the most of it, we're gonna talk about this in one of our classes. Is what does it mean to live as an alternative culture, and how is it a cultural apologetic in itself? Okay, here's another one: imagination and meaning. Okay, now imagination is normally what you think of with Disney, with kids. Okay, but you have to ask this question, okay? Because I want to ask you this. Why did God give you an imagination? Okay. Smart people have thought about this, and there's actually really good answers. Okay. And it wasn't just so you can play video games, and it wasn't just so you could be entertained all day long. Okay. Your imagination is the key to meaning. Okay. And we'll talk about this in a lot of detail, but I'll just give you a little cheat here because I'm hoping you guys come back. Okay. But so, the basic thought here is that before you can think of anything as valuable, before you can consider if anything is right or wrong, it has to be valuable to you. Okay? And so, but how do you decide if it's valuable? Okay? That is the function of your imagination. Your imagination continually, all day long, decides what's valuable and why it's valuable. Okay. Now, we don't realize this, but remember, your weapons are not of this world. Okay. And God doesn't just speak to a person's mind. You get to cooperate with God in what God does. And you know what He does? He fills people's imagination So that, in other words, he gives them meaningful things to think about. And if they understand the meaning of something, then they can decide for themselves if it's right or wrong. Okay? But it's only when you can't understand the meaning of something that you can't figure it out. Okay? Now, that's a lot to say, but we're going to have a whole class on this, and we'll talk about it in detail, and then we'll keep talking about it. We're going to talk about meaning making. You can actually make meaning into people's lives. Okay? Now, that might strike you, but that's actually why you were born. That's what it means to be salt and light. That's what it means to be a blessing to everyone around you. And when I say everyone, I don't mean everyone who accepts Jesus around you. Okay? But to walk around and to be a meaning maker for every person you meet. Okay? And you get to do that. You have God's Holy Spirit. And this just excites me like you wouldn't believe. Just the idea that every minute of your day, you can listen to somebody talking by the time you're done with this class, okay, hopefully, or part 2 if we do it, right? But you can be talking to somebody, hear what they just shared with you, and know, wow, I know how to increase the meaning of what they're intending, and I can do it right now. Now, here's the cool thing. You're not necessarily even bringing up Jesus, okay? But if you're pointing somebody in the way of meaning, you're automatically pointing them toward Jesus every time. Because he is the blueprint of meaning for the entire universe. Okay, right? So meaning making, we're going to talk about this. How do you make meaning? Insights from ancient, medieval, and modern culture. Okay, we're going to look at ancient culture, and we're going to talk about desire. Okay, there's it's a key word here. Okay, we all want stuff. Okay, you think about it. We all want stuff. This is an example of meaning making. All your friends want stuff. You want stuff. And desire is, if you think about it, well, of course, cultures have studied desire. There's a lot to be said about desire. And right now, unfortunately, all we know is I want stuff and half of it's wrong and half of it's right. I don't know what to do, right? And we don't actually realize that desire is one of the ways that our lives are being built up, built into who we're becoming. Right? Medieval, C.S. Lewis, we're going to talk about Lewis a lot, but C.S. Lewis said that the greatest loss to modern civilization was the loss of the medieval understanding of the Christian faith. He considered it a tragedy. So much so that in the Chronicles of Narnia, if you ever read of those, he actually encoded the medieval understanding of faith into the Chronicles of Narnia. And it was only found out recently that he'd encoded it because he never told anybody. And then Michael Ward, one of my professors, he's actually the foremost authority on C.S. Lewis, and he was actually the man who decoded the Chronicles of Narnia. And it's fascinating. We won't necessarily get into it unless you want to, but basically medieval and then modern culture. How did we get where we're at? I mentioned social networking, but I left a lot of unconnected dots. Okay. That's because we don't have enough time today. Okay. But we're going to fill in all the dots, and part of those dots go right through modern art, modern film, poetry. Okay. And this is academic, not just everyone's opinion. Okay. We're going to look at these different cultures and what light do they shed on how we can be influential and involved in every person we meet. Last thought here, modern film, songs, and books. Okay. Harry Potter, you name it. You name the book. See, the question you have to ask is, why does God allow anything at all? Right? Why does he allow certain books, certain songs? Why does God raise up Taylor Swift? Right, to become an icon for a lot of women, right? Why does he do these things? What is he at work at? And can I cooperate with God? Versus just, and again, going back to what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? Besides just being, not sure what to do about it, Jesus made it clear to be in the world, but not of the world. And that's a question that every generation has had to answer. How do I live in the world, but not of the world, right? So how do I interact with modern film, songs, and books? And you'd be surprised. There's actually really good thoughts on this from professors. All the material we're going to look at has been from the life works of different professors, okay? So none of it's opinion, but on the other hand, I think there's a lot of insight. And when you put all these pieces together, then the goal here will be we'll just put it under the umbrella of cultural apologetics, right? An understanding, an opening of your eyes, and a clarification, and maybe a newfound encouragement, okay, and the ability to make a difference, okay. So, with that said, before I share with you homework and everything, I just want to stop. Questions or thoughts, or there's one right here. What about medieval Christianity did Lewis value so much? What was the biggest difference in medieval? Oh, there's some good questions. I want to give you a short answer right now because we're going to spend a whole lot of time on this, okay? But I'm just going to share with you a key word, sacramentalism, okay? The medieval model, and again, when I say medieval Christianity, this is 1,000 years of your faith, okay? Just think about that, 1,000 years. Now, here's another aspect of medieval Christianity, was that it was, think of it as the Middle Ages, when you're like between 30 and 50. Okay, the most important years of your life. You're not a kid anymore. Okay, well, the medieval Christianity was, you could call it mature Christianity. It matured into something. And what did it mature into, and why, and how did it approach life? That's what Lewis was so sad about, because he felt like the approach of medieval Christianity to life has a lot to say to us today, but we don't even know anything about it, right? We just write it off as 1,000 years of faith. I don't think you'll ever even hear about it in a church, right? 1,000 years of faith just wiped away, whatever, right? So now there's reasons. No, I'm not trying to tell you that you should go back to medieval Christianity, okay? There's reasons that, we're where we are today, but there's also a lot of insight from 1,000 years. Okay, so sacramentalism is this idea that okay, I'm going to cheat here. I'll go ahead and cheat just to hopefully make you come back, right? So nominalism is this idea that we live with today. Okay, and you don't even realize it. Okay, what nominalism says is nothing has value until you decide it has value. Okay, so in other words, things are just things. They're just objects with no value. Okay. But in sacramentalism, everything has inherent value. It has a built-in value. Okay, and so I'll give you an example of how this works in just people's lives. Okay, let's take transgender. My neighbor is a cross-dresser, at my house, and so we have conversations and stuff. But basically in transgender. I'm cheating a little because I'm going to give you some thoughts here. But basically, one of the roots is this idea that every person has no inherent value. Their job is to become valuable, okay, by doing something with who they are. Not just doing something like outside of themselves, but themselves, your own body, your own flesh has no value other than what you put into it. Okay, so the job of somebody who's struggling with transgender or is even cross-dressing or whatever, they're actually trying to create value out of their flesh. Okay, now that may not make full sense, but that's because we're not actually talking about that yet. Okay, but the point being is that in medieval Christianity or in sacramentalism, there's an inherent value. And that's an example of, by the way, meaning that people really want. Okay, so we'll get into it later. But any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Now, I didn't go through the details of the class because I didn't know how much time we'd have. What time is it? I'm curious. Oh, good. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. We're doing good. Okay, that's perfect. So I want to go through the details of the class. First of all, I want to give you the homework. Okay. And by the way, as far as homework goes, totally optional. I do think it's worth it. Okay, because the rest of your life is spent in culture. You're always in culture. To spend a little time studying it is going to really benefit you. Okay, so if you don't, that's fine. Okay, but I can tell you, I walk around totally encouraged all the time. And it's because of my 3 years of cultural studying, right? So my point is, this is really worth it to you. Read or browse Gaudium et Spes, or however you pronounce that, okay? And you can just Google it. You'll see it. You can, it is a 1967 Catholic Church article on the role of Christians, okay? And it's just good to know. Hey, wow, okay, go through, I say browse because you don't need to read every word. Certainly not even saying you need to agree with every word, okay? Just read it. It's really, like a starting point for cultural engagement. Okay. Second thing is Timothy Muehlhoff. I'm going to send you an article. Okay. Dr. Timothy Muehlhoff is a professor of communication at Biola University. Spent his entire life studying communication in culture. Okay. And I'm going to give you an article. I didn't print it out because I thought it'd be easier to send you the Word document. Okay. So I want to make sure I've got everyone's email addresses, but I don't think that they're all legible. So I want to make sure I get everyone's email addresses again. Okay. So before you leave, make sure you give it to me on a print or whatever. Okay. But, this article, what it's going to give you is how St. Patrick changed civilization. Okay. And it's short. It's only 3 pages. And it's about living as an alternative culture. We're going to talk about that next week. Okay. But to give you an example, St. Patrick changed an entire culture from no Christianity to over 40% Christianity in his lifetime. With nothing, no modern means of any kind. Okay. So when you read this article, you'll understand what he did. And it was amazingly nothing. You'll look at it and think, what? And it's a little bit of living as the alternative culture. Timothy Muehlhoff article. So I'm going to send it to each of you. Highly encourage you to read it. If you don't, we're still going to talk about it next week. Okay. You'll just have better questions if you read it. Okay. So I want you to do those 2 things. And then by the way, I put a little copy, Siguadium et Spes, and it just goes on. The joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor in any way afflicted. These are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in their hearts, for theirs is a community composed of men. It goes on and on. It's a really well-written article talking about the brotherhood of all of mankind. And we kind of lose that sense. One of the things you're going to hear from me is that I think in this new era, the printing press brought in Protestantism along with all its splintering. I personally, and again, this is just opinion. I'll always differentiate opinion. Okay, my personal opinion is where we're going is a blend between Catholicism and Protestantism. Just kind of the best of both worlds, kind of coming together, and we'll see.